At Bloomberg, we frequently hear that data is by far the biggest challenge in investing in ESG. People complain that the data is not consistent, is not comparable, is not verified. We at Bloomberg, we track more than 15,000 companies, and only 4,500 actually are reporting on greenhouse gas emissions or CO2 emissions in the fiscal year of 2021. So I'm really looking forward to this conversation and truly understand best practices in the industry and then what you're doing in this space. So we'll frame our conversation around 3 topics: record, report, and act. So my first question will go to Michael. So Michael, let's start the conversation with the why. Why is the recording of E, S, and G so important to you and to your organization?
First of all, thank you for having me here. And it's a great pleasure to welcome all of you as an Egyptian to our lovely country, and hope you get time to enjoy it and not just be in the conference and the meetings, which is very important. But I hope you get to enjoy it. This is our favorite part of our country, so get time to see. 2 weeks ago, I think we all saw the UN report reporting on the emissions and the trajectory and where we stand from our Paris Agreement and the trajectory to keep the 1.5 degrees. And one fact in the report is that we are now trending to 2.5, which is catastrophic. And to retain the 1.5, we need to triple our speed in what we do. So reporting is very important. The integrity of data is extremely important for not just us, but for everybody. We have a very, very robust way on how we calculate our data. The report is measured by our sustainability officer, Gunther, who's here also in the conference, and her team does a good job. But in the core essence of the report in Schneider Electric, I have the privilege to lead our R&D, product management and innovations. And there, it is our own responsibility as well. It's the responsibility of everybody in the company to really reduce the CO2 emissions, Scope 3, Scope 4, and Scope 2. We monitor it across the businesses. So with that being said, we have a lot of strategies around how to help our partners in their sustainability journey as well, and help them. And we have actually a dedicated arm in Schneider that is independent, that helps our partners and our customers on their ESG reports. So if it's difficult for them, if they need help, if they need support, we have an arm in Schneider Electric that help empower this within the customer journey.
Oh, fantastic. So Ezgi, how much data are we talking about? So when people say we have to record E, S, and G data, is it 5, 10, 50 KPIs? How many and how costly?
Yeah. So thank you for having me here today. For those of you that may not be familiar with the ABI, we're the world's leading brewer with operations across nearly 50 countries around the world. We're an agri-business, and we see the far-reaching implications of climate change in our operations and in our sourcing regions. So for us, this is as much about resilience and adaptation as it is about mitigation as well when we think about these metrics. But that's on the climate front. More broadly at the ESG level, I mean, imagine nearly 50 countries around the world. You're looking at a number of metrics. Just inside our own operations, we have about 400 what we call good operating practices. So imagine how much there is already being tracked inside our own 4 walls around efficiency, water, energy, around resource management, safety pillars, maintenance. There's so much, right? And then add on to that, now you're starting to look outside your 4 walls into your supply chain, really thinking through the environmental impact, the social impact that lives alongside that, all the way upstream from smallholder farmers, all the way downstream to small, medium-sized businesses, about 5.5 million SMEs that are our customers that sell our products around the world, the mom-and-pop shops. There is a lot of data within that. And what we really find is that we believe in greater transparency and disclosure. We always try to bring in decision-helpful data to conversations, both internally and externally, right? So this is as much about disclosure for the external world so that our stakeholders can see what we're doing. But it is also as important for us to be able to manage our resources better in how we think about supply security, how we think about innovation, how we think about the future of agriculture, future of packaging, future of logistics. So yes, absolutely, there's a lot of data out there. And I think sometimes what we need to remember is sometimes you need better data and not more data, right? So as long as it's decision useful and it helps drive the right actions within the business, that's what we really look for.
Could I ask in terms of cost? Is it costly? So I think when we ask people to start reporting on ESG, and when people respond to consultations in the US, people say it's really costly. Is it costly?
I mean, when it's so integral to how you do your business, right? When you're looking for that quality spec for that barley that you source, or when you're looking for the water stress around the world that gets magnified with climate change, there are certain data points that already get measured just because you're doing business, right? It's the nature of your operating model. I think lately what we're seeing is on the regulatory front, some of the additional reporting requirements that are coming up. Of course, they're going to require additional resources on the IT systems, the tracking, the processes that we're going to put in place, maybe some more rigorous governance mechanisms as well around the world in certain metrics that we may need to add on top of our already long list. But I think beyond the cost, what we should also be thinking of is how do you then also go in lockstep with your CFO, with your control team as well, right? Because increasingly what we're seeing is the ESG reporting and financial reporting are actually coming closer together, right? So do you ever think of cost when you think of financial reporting? No. So why should you think of cost when you think of ESG reporting? Because increasingly this is about how do you create a sustainable business? How do you future-proof your company? Yeah.
Fantastic. So I'm just going to touch on IT, processes, spreadsheet, data, value chain, 50 organizations, 50 subsidiaries. Gunther, SAP, is this space a top priority for you and for your business?
Yeah, that answer is clearly absolutely yes. I mean, when you look at the vast majority of transactions around the globe touch an SAP system, and from everything we've seen and heard here also at COP27, of course, it's very important we start to embed, climate action, but also sustainability in a broader sense, way deeper into the business processes that run across, these systems. And that's, of course, the mission that we've given ourselves at SAP, that we help and support by embedding sustainability, action around carbon, for example, into all major business processes. We already heard, finance is a very important area, but equally into procurement, into supply chain, into transportation, so that we are not having climate action and sustainability just as a side activity. We are having it as part of your core business and what you do. And that's why we made this a very important part of our strategy, and we are implementing this with a set of new products as well, but also carrying this into the areas that we know well. So for us, that's what we see we can contribute.
Fantastic. I heard value chain. Let's talk about Scope 3. So Scope 3, ISSB and IFRAG are going to mandate Scope 3 disclosure. I know that both of your organizations are already disclosing Scope 3 data. I think they're also asking to go beyond just an overall number to actually segment that Scope 3 data into different items. Is it easy? Suppliers, clients, value chain, how Scope 3, can you tell us more?
I mean, I will go maybe 1 second before to the ESG, and I can tell you from our standpoint, we actually look at it as an investment. So it is part of our investment in new innovations, because we truly believe that, and we have it and we practice what we preach, and I will allude to this in a second, any new innovation that comes out of Schneider Electric is a sustainable offer. We have a sustainability, it's more sustainable than the one before and the one before and the one before. That being said, when I go to Scope 3 emissions and the reporting, and it's not for us, it's not just about the reporting. I mean, just to put, again, the nerd in the room, to save about 10 to 15 gigawatt of CO2, gigatons of CO2, we need, if you see the composition of this, 45% of it is in supply chain. 45% of that is in supply chain. 20 to 25% is in digitization, data, integration, interoperability, compatibility, and so on. And then the remaining portion is accelerating the electrification, whether we talk about mobility and so on and so on. So reporting Scope 3 emissions is extremely important because we can only track what we measure. And we can only measure ourselves to success when we have data. Understanding what we like to call the baseline of your Scope 3 downstream emissions is extremely important. I can tell you in Schneider Electric, this is one of our KPIs.
So question, should it be mandatory? Do you agree?
Absolutely.
For all industries? Ezgi.
So we already report on it, as you mentioned, and about 85% of our emissions are outside the operations, outside the four walls, right? And maybe let me give some examples. In the last 4 years, so as of the end of 2021, we had reduced our emissions in that 4-year time frame between 2017 and 2021 about 30% inside our operations. When you look across the whole scope 1, 2, 3, that's about 13%, so a lot lower. What you're going to find out is the more companies invest in deep decarbonization inside their operations, the more that percentage of emissions of that company is going to come from scope 3. So ultimately, yes, you may try to prioritize and say, okay, in the first few years, in the first decade, invest in your own company and then bring others along with you on the journey and share the learnings. But ultimately, you will rapidly get to that point where your emissions, if you do a good job inside, your entire emissions will be outside, right? And you don't want to be in that point because there are so much lessons learned in the process. In 2017, we announced 100% renewable electricity commitment. Right now, over 80% of our volume, as of the end of last year, has been contracted with renewable sources around the world, and we do that by bringing local additional capacity in markets where we operate in. So we don't invest in existing assets, it's not about offsetting, it's really transforming, helping transform grids around the world. What we're finding out in that process is we're really learning a lot about the should-be cost of renewables. We're learning a lot. I totally agree on the procurement and supply chain side. We're building capabilities inside the business that now we feel like we can share with our supply chain partners, right? So, really thinking through what are the enabling regulatory environments that will create that competitive marketplace? Who are the suppliers, the developers that can come with you from market to market that can help implement those long-term power purchase agreements and invest in solar and wind farms? You're taking all those learnings. I think people feel very overwhelmed when they see the huge percentages coming from Scope 3, but in our case, about half of that Scope 3 emissions actually come from electricity of our suppliers, right? So if I'm switching from brown to green electricity so quickly, why not bring others along with us on that journey so we can help them reduce their Scope 2, which would be our Scope 3, right? So I think there's a lot of lessons learned there, and just last month, 2 months ago, in September, we brought together about 250 supply chain partners that represented 50% of the Scope 3 emissions. And we talked to them through lessons learned, the vision we have, how we can co-design and co-pilot together. And I think you need to do that, right? So yeah, Scope 3, you have to start looking at it, you have to start tracking it.
Okay, it's going to be mandatory. Yeah. Get ready. So the next question that I have is about reporting, right? So in terms of reporting, we're talking about ISSB being perceived as one global framework that companies need to adopt. Gunther, what are your thoughts? One global framework, do you think it's possible?
Well, one global framework would be a great thing to have, and I'm looking forward to the day this happens, but I, at the same point in time, think it's highly unlikely that we will really land with one framework in the near future. So I think making things mandatory can help, although I also want to say that we still need to progress on some of the standards and regulations themselves to really be able to make it mandatory. So for example, we got to get closer to full accounting standards, taking out more of the ambiguity, taking out more of the holes in some of the frameworks. And that is why ISSB is a very important initiative from my end. But for companies like SAP, both as a company ourselves where we have to comply, but also with our products, of course, we will have to serve numerous frameworks for the time being. Now, how are we doing this? I personally believe we can look at the common denominator below most of these regulations and cover that well, and then grow this common denominator when the regulations become more mature and more accepted. So that's how we approach it. Hopefully we see some convergence. But in the meantime, we also need to serve the different frameworks which are out there.
Any thoughts? For those of you that are global organizations?
Yeah, there's still, we are seeing signals towards standardization and harmonization, which is very welcome. But at the same time, we're continuing to report on voluntary frameworks and the regulatory requirements that are coming out.
So, controversial point here. So, the Harvard Business Review wrote an article saying that more than 70% of the executives surveyed across multiple industries and regions reported that they lack confidence in their organization's own ESG reporting, and nearly 66% feel unprepared to meet ESG goals and disclosure requirements. How do you feel about these numbers?
I saw the report and I actually was not surprised at all. I can tell you a few weeks ago, we hosted our own innovation summit in North America, and we had 1,500 customers, hundreds of our suppliers, and the consensus was, please help us. And that's why, as I alluded to earlier, we have our own arm that helps the customers do their ESG reporting. The most important part, to your point earlier, is that we really, how do we get our suppliers with us in the journey? So think about it that we can do all what we can do. A lot of the emissions also comes out of our own circle. So what we've launched a project, we called it the Zero Carbon Project, where we identify 1,000 of our suppliers, and we're helping them to be more sustainable. In some cases, investing in them to become more sustainable, to reduce their emissions, their own facility and the material that you use. We have a portfolio, we have a social responsibility, and that's how we like to think about it in Schneider, that we have the know-how, the technology, and the power to really deploy and spread our knowledge. So we try to do this across the board. So I'm not surprised about the study. Hopefully it will get less and less by day because it is a movement, right? And it's a must-have movement. And we can only succeed as we are as strong and as successful as our smallest supplier and the smallest player in the value chain, with all due respect. And if we're not all at the same level of knowledge and speed and help one another and have a just transition as well, it will be very challenging.
So, Ezgi, do you trust your data?
I would say no 1 month is alike in sustainability, right? We live in a rapidly evolving landscape with rapidly changing needs of our consumers, our stakeholders, the local communities we live with, the investors, right? So this is quickly evolving, and you need to be able to match the pace of your capabilities and the support you get from external partners like auditors or legal firms, et cetera. You need to be able to match that pace to the pace of change. So I think this is what companies are now going through now. But again, it's a welcome change because for a global business, what you see is happening in the EU and in the US, that's going to prepare you for what's to come in markets across Latin America, Asia, et cetera. So.
Do you see any change in the KPIs that your investors are asking you about? So for example, at COP, we're talking more about biodiversity, about natural capital, about water. Are those things surfacing more when we have investors coming to you and asking you questions about ESG?
I mean, the most important piece, and maybe we should have touched on this at the beginning, is materiality, right? So I think a lot of our investors and analysts understand that what's material issues to the business, and they ask questions around it. The change we've seen over the last few years is they not only look for a quantitative metric, they also want to understand the context. You know, why you do what you do, what are the lessons learned, the challenges, and what does the future look like? Where are you heading? So increasingly, we try to provide more context in our ESG report for that purpose.
Yeah. Gunther?
Well, what we clearly see is that investors are asking for a broader perspective, right? This is driven by things like EU taxonomy in Europe, Scope 3 we already touched upon, you know, looking broader into your value chain. But then also when you look at things like Supply Chain Due Diligence Act and the social responsibility part into that. So these sorts of inquiries are there, and we need to respond to them as companies, of course, more and more. And I think we got to get ready for it.
Absolutely. Okay, so we have around 2 minutes left, and I have 2 questions about COP27. So sharp and quick. So COP27, Michael, are you optimistic? Is it above your expectations or below your expectations, COP27?
I am by nature an optimist, and I think we can definitely, if we work together collectively, we can keep the trajectory and bend the curve again. If we work collectively, empower technologies and solutions like microgrid, depend on renewable energy, work together on scope 3, downstream, which is a big offender. So I'm very optimistic. I'm looking forward to really see the actions in works from all the successful meetings that we had and really see actionable items and see some regulations being enforced that we've talked about in the past few days. And I look forward to the 28th.
Okay, Ezgi, so
This is my second full day on the ground, having really great conversations and dialogues. I am also by nature an optimist. I like to call myself an impatient optimist. I think when you work in sustainability, you need to have a belief system that a better future is possible and you can come together and create that change. You know, see the world as it is today, but imagine a better one and work together to get there. And I think that's why we're all here this week.
Above or below?
Well, as a German engineer, I think I have to be a little under-impressed. I would like to see more tangible standards that we can implement, right? More work, more specifications, and I hope we see more of that moving forward.
Okay, so last question, action. I think COP27 has to be about action. We have to stop talking. And so what's your action for next year? From now up to next COP?
I mean, our sustainability commitment remains unchanged. And if you read our reporting, which I trust fully, you will see that we are trending in the right direction, actually at a higher speed. What I can promise is that every new offer, every new technology that you see electrifying because of energy is the most important or a very important part of the equation, is that you will always see sustainable offers using not just sustainable material, but empowering sustainable actions.
Thank you. Ezgi?
I'm really excited about Saturday, food and ag, really putting that high on the agenda and thinking through adaptation and resilience. So for me, that's going to be a big one for us to really think through what are the reasons to believe, the case studies, the learnings, so that we can continue to share that with the world.
Fantastic. Gunther?
Well, we are in many projects with our customers implementing solutions in that space, and that's what I will do when I get back from here, of course, and continue to do that. What I think we should share more is positive outcomes and success stories of what people have done to really make a difference, and that's the one thing I think we should move forward for the next COP and other events.
Fantastic. For me, is data, is asking and making sure that our investors are facing the data to take action. Thank you so much. It was a pleasure having you with us.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.